David Rivkin fue consejero en la Casa Blanca en el Departamento de Justicia durante gobiernos republicanos. El tema es la inmunidad del presidente Donald Trump. Hay una columna de opinión hoy en el Wall Street Journal que se titula Estados Unidos depende de la inmunidad presidencial. En resumen, dice que rechazar el reclamo de Trump habría significado un gobierno más débil y un sistema de justicia más politizado. Por favor, Ana, salude al invitado, al abogado Rivkin, sobre esta demanda y pregúntele cómo ve él el futuro de esa figura de la inmunidad.
Good morning, Mr. Rivkin. Thank you very much for your time today at W Radio.
Good morning.
Let us begin by asking you, in terms of this immunity and the recent decision of the Supreme Court, how do you see the future of immunity for the presidential power in this country towards the future?
The future of immunity for president is strong. It reflects the way the law worked before this decision. So this decision is not some innovation. It really restates in a very powerful fashion what the law is. I want to make two very brief points and elaborate on it, hopefully. Point number one, this is not about Trump at all. This is about the ability of a president who is uniquely positioned as the head of the executive branch in discharging his core constitutional functions to act fearlessly. That means that he would be able, all things being equal, to govern well. Not to have immunity is not merely something that's useful to a president. That's useful for good government and individual liberty. Please translate.
El futuro de la inmunidad presidencial está fuerte, refleja cómo funciona la ley antes de esta decisión y reafirma lo que es la ley estadounidense. Quiere hacer dos puntos breves y nos avanza el primero. Uno, esto no se trata de Donald Trump, es sobre la habilidad de un presidente en sus funciones constitucionales de actuar y tomar decisiones que debe tomar para poder gobernar.
Pero entonces, señor Rivkin, ¿por qué la jueza Sonia Sotomayor ha dicho que esta decisión hace que el expresidente Donald Trump sea un rey por encima de la ley?
This being said, why do you believe then that Judge Sotomayor has said that this decision makes Trump a king above the law?
It's a good question, and I find the fact that Justice Sotomayor and Justice Jackson, who also wrote a separate dissenting opinion, and Justice Kagan, who joined Justice Sotomayor, wrote this intemperate and frankly vile dissent, very depressing, leaving aside over-technical legal arguments. One of the things, particularly relating to Justice Sotomayor, I find deplorable, is that she made a very powerful moral case, which is what prompted the question, a moral case that everybody has, including the president, has to be equally affected by law. And therefore, what the court has done is somehow puts the president above the law. I want your viewers, your listeners, to understand that there are Supreme Court cases that discuss positively and affirm immunity, absolute immunity for prosecutors, members of Congress, which actually is based upon a constitutional grant of authority for members of Congress. And are you sitting down? For judges. For judges. Okay? And one more thing. Today, you can go on the Supreme Court website and look it up. There's a dissent by Justice Sotomayor in a denial of a cert petition. It's a little technical, but let's just say Justice Sotomayor wrote a 3-page opinion. Half of that opinion is dedicated to praising absolute prosecutorial immunity. You tell me, how can she possibly write this vile dissent, knowing that the case law and the Constitution and court decisions evidence immunity for official, I should have said, for official actions. But unofficial actions, everybody is the same. But for official actions, to her as a Supreme Court justice, as well as all lower federal courts and state courts at that.
Pues responde que es una muy buena pregunta porque la juez Sotomayor y el juez Jackson escribieron una opinión distinta que difiere de la decisión que tomó la Corte. Él cree que estos argumentos se alejan de la decisión de la legal o los argumentos legales. Nos dice señala que la decisión o las declaraciones de la juez Sotomayor son deplorables porque es un caso moral más bien que avanza en contra del expresidente Donald Trump. Él quiere que entienda o que nuestros oyentes entiendan que estos casos de la Corte Suprema afectan positivamente a miembros del Congreso, a fiscales, a jueces, incluso a la propia juez Sotomayor. Entonces no entiende por qué este escrito de la juez Sotomayor y este escrito de opinión dedicado a no favorecer la inmunidad o a criticarla cuando ella misma se vería pues beneficiada de la misma.
El juez de la Corte Suprema, Clarence Thomas, abordó una pregunta muy interesante y es si fue legalmente designado el fiscal especial del caso Jack Smith. Y lo que él dice es que los fiscales especiales necesitan ser confirmados por el Senado. ¿Qué piensa él de esa pregunta que se hace uno de los jueces de la Corte?
Let's speak about Jack Smith, special counsel Jack Smith. There's a lot of speculation about the fact that he was assigned to this role, but that the process was not how legally it's supposed to be done. What is your opinion about this and, the status of Jack Smith and the question that Clarence Thomas was asking himself if he was assigned the correct way?
I understand the question. The argument is that Jack Smith was improperly appointed because the Attorney General lacks an ability to execute such appointments, and Congress has never given it to him. This argument has been made prominently in the case in Palm Beach, I think it's Palm Beach, involving classified documents brought by Jack Smith. This argument was also reflected or featured with approval in Justice Thomas's concurrence in yesterday's immunity decision. It's a good argument. I don't personally think, just as a matter of litigation assessment, that it would bear fruit, but it's a good argument conceptually.
Él considera que es un buen argumento en la manera conceptual. Nos dice que es un argumento que se ha usado ampliamente en el caso de Palm Beach y pues se ha reflejado bastante, aprobación alrededor de ese caso.
Si hablemos de lo que va a pasar en las cortes inferiores, ¿qué tan difícil, en su opinión, es probar que un evento o un acto fue un acto oficial versus uno que no? In terms of what's going to happen now in the lower courts, how complex is it to find evidence or to, pinpoint an event to say, okay, this was an official event, this was not an official event?
Well, it requires as many things in the law, fact-finding, by the lower courts, which has never happened. So the case has been remanded back to Judge Chutkan in the District Court for the District of Columbia. The Supreme Court has provided guidance as a matter of law what legal principles she should apply to the facts she discovers. But yes, the one of the reasons it's such a nuanced and careful opinion, it says that except for the exercises of a person's core constitutional authority, which is essentially foreign and defense and intelligence purposes, all other exercises of official acts have to be scrutinized to determine if they're truly official versus private. So there's nothing unusual about that. The reason the Supreme Court did not give a definitive answer is because they did not have any facts as a part of a record.
Bueno, nos dice que requiere de muchas cosas en la ley, nos dice que no hay nada inusual en la decisión de la Corte porque nos dice que hay mucho que tiene que tener en cuenta y muchas evidencias, para saber si fue oficial o no oficial que tendrán que analizar. Nos dice que ese es el proceso regular que debe seguir la Corte Suprema con respecto a este caso.
Señor Rifkin, ¿es cierto que esta decisión de la Corte Suprema permitiría, por ejemplo, que un presidente de Estados Unidos pueda organizar un golpe militar para mantenerse en el poder y quedar inmune? Porque ese es otro de los argumentos de los que los jueces que votaron en contra pues están advirtiendo.
Another one of the concerns about this decision by the court is that some people believe that if a president was to, ask the military to take control militarily of the country, they would be able to do it because they would have this sort of immunity. What do you believe about that argument?
That is completely misplaced, just like the other hypotheticals given in their, or mentioned in the opinions by dissenting judges. I want to articulate it very carefully. In order for something to be covered by immunity, either absolute or presumptive, it needs to be an exercise of a presidential powers. We're not talking about exercises of powers that have not, or authority that have nothing to do with the presidency. So the short answer is trying to perpetuate one in office for a coup is not, repeat, not an exercise of president's constitutional authority. Therefore, it is not immune. Therefore, what's not immune is ordering your bodyguards or SEALs to kill your political opponent or rape somebody or take a bribe. None of those things, including the coup planning or execution, God forbid, involve the exercise of president's constitutional powers.
Pues nos dice que él quiere responder muy bien esta pregunta porque digamos que esa situación hipotética no explica bien lo que está cubierto en la inmunidad presidencial o que puede, digamos, incluir ese poder presidencial. Entonces, cuando se hablan de ese ejercicio en el poder, la respuesta corta es que pues eso no incluye perpetuar a alguien en el poder, por ejemplo, eso no hace parte de las funciones presidenciales, eso no lo hace inmune, o por ejemplo, matar a un oponente, eso no hace parte de la autoridad presidencial, o pues también nos dice que eso no da ningún tipo de inmunidad y quiere dejarlo claro porque eso excluye cualquier de ejercicio de poder presidencial que pueda ser incluido dentro de una inmunidad.
Qué pena cambiarle de tema al abogado, pero es que él fue abogado de Alex Saab en un momento. Él piensa que la ingenuidad, que hubo o no hubo ingenuidad del presidente del gobierno de Joe Biden al confiar en un acuerdo que luego se incumplió.
I'm sorry for changing the subject, lawyer, but since you at some point represented Alex Saab, we wanted to ask you, do you believe that the government, the Biden administration, had some sort of, ingenuity when they did this deal? They sent Alex Saab back, but Venezuela did not do what they had, agreed to do?
What's the question?
In terms of Alex Saab, the deal that the U.S. government did to send Alex Saab back to Venezuela, do you think that perhaps the government was naive in thinking that Venezuela was going to go ahead and do what they had agreed to?
On 2 points, I have absolutely no idea what the Biden administration wanted to do, to paraphrase a sentence from a debate several days ago by Trump, who said, I don't understand what Biden said, and I don't think he understands it either. So I am generally skeptical of the notion that the Biden administration is capable of intricate plans, but the honest answer is I have no idea. But one thing I did want to emphasize, that the pardon issued to Alex Saab is in no way affected by whatever disappointments the administration may have suffered as a result of the actions of a Maduro government. There's apples and oranges.
Pues nos dice que no tiene ni idea de lo que la administración Biden quería hacer o pretendía hacer. Es generalmente escéptico con respecto a las decisiones o lo que quería hacer la administración Biden o los planes que tuviera, pero realmente en general no tiene ni idea. Nos dice que este perdón de Alex Saab no pudo haber estado afectado o no cree que se hubiera visto relacionado por cualquier cosa que la administración haya sufrido por parte del gobierno de Maduro. Well, thank you so much for being with us in W Radio, Mr. David Ripken. It's been a pleasure.
Bye-bye.